Okay, I'm actually gonna, I'm sure people noticed Jack is not with us today, but you have the three of us. And I am going to start the slideshow here because we have just some fun stuff to talk about in the beginning because we do want to get started on time. We have a good 70 plus slides to get through. So I'm going to start to share here. And if you guys would tell me that it's working. Yep, looks good. Okay, awesome. So as per usual, if you're joining us, if you could change your chat settings to say that you're speaking to everyone, not just to the hosts and panelists. And we really do encourage everyone to chat as much as possible. If anything, I think the chat is almost the funnest part of these, hearing, how people react to things and what they're doing in their neck of the woods. So absolutely use the chat function. Just make sure that you're speaking to everyone as you do it. So Jack always starts with a question, and I was trying to think of some question to start with. And I thought, because Paul Bellino, one of our colleagues here at Data Central, had posted that he tried a dill ice cream cone. So there's a dill flavored ice cream cone, not dill pickle flavored, dill ice cream over the past week. And it seemed like a lot of people ate some unusual things over either the 4th or whatever you were doing, if you had a long weekend or if you're overseas. So I thought I would ask, did you guys eat anything particularly unique in the past week or just recently? Nothing?
No, I mean, it's pretty standard, like 4th of
Yeah.
July fare. But someone put in the chat 3D fish, and I'm wondering what that means.
3D fish?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What would
Isn't
that
fish
mean?
technically 3D?
Yeah, flatfish would be more interesting almost. Unless, yeah, or like
It was printed with fish ink.
But
Apparently.
what was the object that was printed
Was it
using the
also
fish ink?
a fish? Did you print a fish from fish ink? I hope so.
That's really funny.
I'm glad you're explaining it too, because yeah, I can't see the chat as it comes in. So what is it? It's a fish that's been printed with something?
We're not sure what has been printed. We just know that fish went into the materials that made up the ink.
Oh.
So it's somewhere in the equation.
So maybe like a 3D printed, like how you can 3D print chocolate and everything, but it's like extruded fish or something like that?
We've confirmed that it was a fish fillet that was printed using fish at
That
a food
is
tech conference.
interesting.
That's really cool.
Wow.
That's
Was
much
it
cooler
good?
than mine. I was going to say I had peach pecan whiskey from Florida Georgia lines online, and we used it. My cousins have like a snow cone machine that comes out every 4th of July. Like they bought an ice shaver. So we made snow cones with it, but this is much cooler.
That at least sounds really delicious. Yeah, I don't know if they said. I'd be interested to hear if the 3D printed fish was good and like if the texture was good.
Yeah. So yeah, Mindy, if you have any notes on the flavor of that fish fillet, please feel free to drop it in the chat. We're very curious to know.
Yeah. I don't know. This isn't as interesting as that, but we made flaming Saganaki this weekend.
Wow.
So there's a little grocery store on Devon by me here in Chicago that was selling like perfect little cubes of Saganaki cheese. And so I was like, it was $4. I was like, it'd be something fun to do. So if you're not familiar with Saganaki, it's basically taking a Greek cheese and cooking it in a pan called a sagani. And then in Chicago, they kind of invented this way of doing it with, a lot of like theatrical flair, which is to pour brandy or ouzo or something like that into the pan and setting it on fire. And then everybody, in the dining room says, "Opa," when it's set on fire. So we did that. So, it's so easy. You literally just flour and bread the cheese, and then you cook it in a little pan. And then we put some brandy over the top and we flamed it. And it was so good. And a lot of the kind of old school Greek places in Greektown have shut down over the past few years. So it's kind of harder to get than it used to be. So I would totally recommend. You could do it with halloumi or kind of any of the Greek cheeses. This one had that like particularly salty flavor that you associate with Saganaki, but it was super fun. I really enjoyed it. And I looked it up. We actually do have it in flavor. So we have it in our consumer scores rating system where we ask consumers what they think about it. And I was actually surprised, like 16% of consumers say that they've heard of Saganaki at this point, which I don't know. I feel like when I say it, most people outside of Chicago have never tried it. So, but only 7% of US consumers have tried it. And I think if, we don't have it on this screen here, or you can kind of see at the bottom there, that it does skew way more towards the Midwest, which I think is obviously kind of that Chicago factor. And then this is the other thing. Claire, you said you were interested in talking about this because so Heinz over the weekend, I think they've said this a few times and they kind of get like a bunch of chatter after the fact. But everybody, you know, has this kind of argument about whether you should store ketchup in the refrigerator or whether it's okay to be on the table. And so Heinz tweeted out that officially they do suggest that you keep it in the refrigerator. And of course, everybody, you know, it started a whole new kind of argument about it. And so I was interested, you know, just hearing from people in the food industry where they store their ketchup. I don't know where you guys store yours, if you keep it room temperature.
Unanimously fridge so far. Fridge is the number one way to go.
Unanimously, wow.
Unanimously. Except for one person who doesn't care for ketchup. That's also where I was.
Maybe also a Chicagoan. I keep mine in the refrigerator. I definitely.
I just have it's a functional thing. I actually have more fridge space than I have like pantry space.
Good point. Yeah.
By default.
Yeah. Well, I think part of the argument is always like because you do see it on tables like at diners, but that they're going through it so much faster, so that it just
and it does separate. That's why it's often in those like classic where you can't see that it's separated.
True. Yeah.
It's a good shake.
But so you heard it here. The food industry professionals are pretty unanimous that it should be kept in the refrigerator. And then very last thing, right as we hit the top of the hour so we can get started on time, is it's National Fried Chicken Day. So yeah, I mean, every day is some weird, you know, stupid food holiday, but this is a pretty good one. I feel like I saw a bunch of local Chicago restaurants saying that they were doing deals across the country. So if you're looking for something to eat tonight, maybe order some fried chicken. There's probably some deals around you. And with that, we can get started. Because, you know, the past few times, pretty much every time we do one of these webinars, we never make it to the end. I think last month I was racing at the end. And so we're trying to get started right at the top of the hour and hopefully make it through all the content that we've promised you. So this is our season 5, episode 7, the Simply Smarter webinar. So we've been doing 5 seasons of these now. And we're, I don't know how we break them up actually. So I'm not sure how far along we are into the season. But today we're going to cover our usual what's new, just kind of the fun stuff that we're seeing in the industry that's happening out there. And then Hui's going to take us through some of the recreational data and trends and what's going to happen this summer based on really, really new data that just came out in our recreational keynote report. Then Claire's going to take us through some of the seasonality trends and menu trends that are particularly kind of relevant to the summer season. And then I'll bring us home at the end and talk about the spice factor and just, you know, how America and, you know, kind of global capacity for spice and really heat, you know, has been increasing over the years. So jumping right into it, we always kind of start off with some of the new reports that we have in our Report Pro Smart Library. Jack always says this, if you don't have access to our Report Pro content library at this point, absolutely reach out to us. Send an email at hello@datacentral.com. Put, you know, a little thing in the chat. You'll have an opportunity at the end of this, but there really is some amazing stuff being released in Report Pro day in and day out. And some of those are, I just wanted to call attention to the economic indicators reports. These come out every single month, and I think they're absolutely fantastic. I always make sure that I read them. We've heard from quite a few people in the industry that this is, you know, one of the reports in Report Pro that they make sure that they read all the time, because it really keeps you on top of what's happening economically in the country and around the world. And that's changing so fast all the time. I feel like it's such a confusing landscape still. So just looking at the, you know, the past month, we did see inflation tick down a little bit. We saw consumer sentiment tick it up a little bit. You know, gas prices are pretty flat. So it just kind of gives you that level set on what's really happening in the economy. And Claire, this is a report that you put together. This was absolutely fascinating. There was like page after page of just really, really interesting data in here.
Yeah, this one was really fun. I was starting to get this hunch. I feel like everyone it hurts me as a millennial to know that I am no longer the most relevant
Yeah.
food generation, but I feel like nobody's proven it with data, and we have that data. So I went in to look and see what was happening. Is Gen Z coming into its foodie era? Or I felt like boomers were getting more relevant. Maybe I thought it was just my circle. That's not what the data showed. The data shows that is in fact true. So this one was a fun one to put together on changing dynamics.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see, some of the trends that we've talked about over the years, how they're maturing in relation to different demographics. And I agree, like when I look at my parents and the things that they're eating, and they've caught up with so many of the trends. They order so many of them now. And yeah, as a millennial, I definitely
Yeah, I feel like they're pushing the trends, and like otherwise they're kind of
Yeah.
set. And so like it's
Yeah.
actually the two sides are pushing them in sort of an interesting way.
Yeah, we'll see as millennials what happens to us. And then you wrote this one too, but this is one I think is also one that is I always just look forward to year after year, because global flavors are really kind of what drives so many flavor trends anymore. I
Yes,
thought
and
it really
if you do have Report Pro, you should check it out, because there's a new we helped me, and our other Mac Council team members helped blow out the Asian Macs. So we actually go into much more details, and this has the release of those.
And that's where so much of the interesting stuff was too, because like a lot of the Latin stuff we reported on over the years, but like I think there was one slide in there that was showing what was happening in non-alcoholic beverages on Asian inspired drinks and menus, and it was like plum juice was the top growing, like, which is so interesting. Like I think there's a lot of little nuggets if you're looking for kind of fodder for flavor innovation. And then shout out to Renee and the Trend Spotting team who just produced this report. I think it released either yesterday or the day before. But this is about limited edition and seasonal retail products that you would find at supermarkets and grocery stores. Really, really fun stuff in here. There's a spread on all of the various Oreo flavors that they've released over the years. There's a really great interview with I believe it's the head of innovation at Kellogg's, and he kind of talks about some of the products that they've released over the years. They did the Pringles, that's kind of flavored after the Wendy's chicken sandwich. He talked a little bit about how the super toasted Cheez-Its, how they kind of came up with those, and which flavor became permanent because they saw during that limited release that it did really well. So really interesting report with some really fun stuff in there. And a lot of it that we've been seeing just in these past few months. And then in Report Pro, so we're really excited about this. I already signed up for all of the things that I'm interested in, but we have a new feature in Report Pro, which shout out to the team that made this happen. But it's called Content Watch, and it's basically if you're interested in a particular topic, you can sign up to receive emails every single time that we release a report on that topic. So you can decide the cadence. So you can every single time a report is released, you get an immediate email. If you'd rather do once a week or just monthly, you can say, I want absolutely everything that's released in there, or select those particular tags. So let's say you only work in breakfast innovation, or you're particularly interested in fried chicken or proteins or whatever it may be. You can select those, and every single time that we release new content, you'll get an email, and you can kind of see the latest data about what's happening in that particular category. So it's something we've been asked a lot about, and so we're really excited to finally release it. All right, so we're already doing better than usual. Usually we're about 15, 20 minutes in by the time we get to this point. So this is just kind of how we head off the hour, talking about some of the fun, interesting stuff happening in the industry. So we're all kind of on the same page about some of the fun, interesting innovation happening in the food industry. I think a lot of people probably saw this. They got a lot of media attention for it. But Pepsi released their Cola Chup ahead of the July 4th holiday. So speaking of ketchup, I don't know where you would keep this, either in the refrigerator or in the pantry, but it's basically what it sounds like. It's Pepsi flavors infused into ketchup. And it's not, like some of these are kind of, like one-off jokes. They really did work with the Culinary Institute of America to design a ketchup that takes those cola flavors and make something that I haven't had a chance to try it, but actually sounds and looks really delicious and interesting. They use Joey Chestnut, the hot dog, again, just crowned this week, hot dog eating champion of the world. They used him as kind of the spokesperson for it, and they released it at a bunch of stadiums across the country on July 4th. So kind of an interesting product. If you're on TikTok and you follow the Savannah Bananas, you know what a fun team they are. So they are an exhibition baseball team based in Savannah. They are hilarious. So they play by their own rules, literally banana rules. It's a little bit different from regular baseball. They have one team that they mainly play, that the Party Animals, but they're crazy. They dance, they sing. It's really like part show and part baseball game. But you can imagine a team called the Savannah Bananas probably has really interesting food at the stadium themed to bananas, and they really do. Bananas are my favorite fruit, so I really want to get there and see them at some point. But they have things like a Savannah beer, so the Savannah banana beer. So it's actually brewed with bananas in there. I know they have a garbage nacho plate that's actually served on the lid of a garbage can. And so it has kind of those overloaded nachos, and then there's the banana on the side, and they ring a bell every time that somebody orders it. So they just have all kinds of really interesting banana flavored things. And I always say, if you're looking for some fun, interesting, kind of innovative work, always look at the various stadiums across the country and what they're releasing. Another area to always look at if you need some kind of innovation fodder are amusement parks across the country. And Naomi Van Til on the Data Central team here actually sent this to me. So Disney's been doing some really interesting food work over the years, but she was at Six Flags over the weekend, and they had some really interesting food as part of this Flavors of the World festival. So they had things that you would normally kind of associate with these types of festivals, like gelato and things like that. But then they had some really interesting stuff. So they had salchipapas, the Peruvian fries with the hot dogs on top. They had arrosticini, the Italian meat skewers. And then on the left-hand side here is, I had never even heard of this. It's called a Morir Sandado, which is basically kind of an orange juice milk beverage that comes out of the Dominican Republic. So she said it was super, super refreshing. And then the number of Indian foods that they had was really interesting. I know, Claire, you've reported a lot about kind of the growth of Indian cuisine in America. But you can see there, they have gulab jamun, which she said was the most delicious thing there. I think they had a masala chai there. So I think sometimes we take for granted that consumers across the country may be experiencing a lot more of these kind of innovative things at places that you might associate with somewhere like amusement parks and stadiums than we know. And state fairs are another good one. I always love to see what's happening at state fairs across the country. And so the Wisconsin State Fair, this is their 10th anniversary of their Sporkies competition. So, you can kind of enter any of the weird food products that you're releasing at the state fair. And then for the first time ever, they're doing a Drinkies competition. So on the left-hand side, I think this is probably the most interesting one I saw in there. This is the dill pickle donut. So I'm really seeing so much, dill pickle kind of innovation happening, but it's a yeast-raised donut. It has dill pickle juice that's folded into the cream cheese there. And then they top it with those the thick cut dill pickles there, and then they do a sprinkling of dill over the top of it. So kind of that sweet and savory, the same thing like kind of Paul had in the ice cream cone. And then on the right-hand side here is one of the entries into the Drinkies category. And this is a brown sugar sweet potato iced latte. So it's a brown sugar iced latte that has sweet potato puree folded into it, and then brown sugar boba pearls. Then on top there is a toasted marshmallow, and then there's a sweet potato funnel cake donut on top there. So yeah, I don't know. I just think the stuff happening at state fairs across the country is always so fun. If you're looking for really over-the-top wild foods to kind of, support your innovation work for LTOs in the future or some unusual, CPG products, always look to state fairs. You guys might have seen this one, but the upside down puff pastry tart trend that's kind of taken over TikTok. So I think this is a really good example of, one of those trends that hits home cooks. That's like an easy way to produce something that looks pretty gourmet or that looks pretty fancy. So it's all over TikTok. It's basically, like an upside down, pineapple cake, but you put puff pastry over the top of it. So you can put anything. These are sweet ones here. You see savory ones with tomatoes, but usually you put some type of sauce, you put some type of fruit or vegetable, and then you put a little rectangle of puff pastry on top. You cook it in the oven, and the fruit or vegetable underneath kind of cooks into the puff pastry, and you turn it over, and they do look really good. I mean, they really do look kind of tasty Danishes there. So just kind of the latest TikTok trend of the month. Salt and Straw, you know, the ice cream chain across the country, always does really interesting things. We've covered them a few times on here, but this is their upcycled series. So it's using, you know, upcycled ingredients that might otherwise be thrown away. I know in one of them, they used a bread from a Portland bakery that's a day old that might otherwise be thrown out, and they used that in a bread pudding flavor. They have chocolate stracciatella, but they use the entire cacao pod. So even, you know, kind of the outside of the cacao and that cacao pulp. They use okara flour, which is made with the byproduct of making soy. So that's used in one of the flavors here. I think it's a salted caramel cupcake flavor that uses that okara flour. So if you have a chance, definitely get to Salt and Straw. And then the last couple here, overseas trends. You might have seen this, what's happening in China. So the town of Zibo is overrun with barbecue tourists in China. So this is kind of the big trend of the summer in China, where literally the entire town each day doubles with tourists coming into the town who want to try. It's 12 football fields full of barbecue. So you can kind of see the tables out here. They're barbecue skewers. They cost about 15 cents each, and you know, cook them right at your table here, and then you kind of fold them into a little tortilla-like object. And it's kind of for college students, the hot new thing. The town has been running ferries and buses into the town day in and day out. Other towns have been sending researchers into Zibo to figure out how they can recreate this in their towns. But this is kind of the big trend, the big summer trend happening in China right now. And then the very last thing to talk about, our fall LTOs are going to be coming quicker than we think. So I think Wendy's already announced that they're going to be doing a caramel apple frosty. And we have some dates already. I think Dunkin's is August 16th, if I remember. And then Starbucks is August 29th. It looks like they're going to come out. So, you know, for Dunkin' already, we're just a little over a month away from some of the pumpkin spice items to be coming out. But we haven't heard any of the new flavors yet, but we do know some of the dates. So pretty quickly, it's going to happen here. And with that, I will turn it over to Hui to talk about getting back to summer and not fall, to talk about some of the latest travel and recreation data from our brand new keynote.
Thank you, Mike. Right on time too. And while I get through some of the data we have here, Mike, we have a request from the chat to enable closed captioning. So I think you have the account to be able to do that. But yeah, so thank you, Mike, for pointing out all of this.
And if anybody
awesome
in the chat knows how to do that, let me know. I don't usually run these, so but I would be happy to do it. So
it should be in your Zoom settings.
I'll play around here if you keep going.
Yeah, Mike, if you open the chat, Kendra has a link that she sent you, so that might be able to help. But also, if you could go back a couple slides.
Sure. Sorry.
No worries. Back to the beginning. Yeah, awesome. So yeah, if you notice, a lot of the industry examples that Mike pointed out are very seasonal, very summer, very engaged with state fairs, amusement parks, theme parks, all of these wonderful places where, you know, consumers are likely to check out during the summer when it's warm and when it's exciting to try all of these interesting foods and flavors. And so we have a bunch of data for you here, both from our ongoing Table Stakes Consumer Tracker series and also the most recent recreational keynote, which is our most recent keynote. It's a giant study that engages 13 different recreation venues. It's a massive undertaking, and we can't wait for you guys to check it out. But let's first talk about summer travel, because I think it's on a lot of people's minds right now. Mike, if you could move to the next slide. Yeah, so we asked consumers between June and August what their plans for traveling are. And even though, you know, nearly half of consumers say that they don't have any travel plans, the rest are mostly going to be saying that they're traveling domestic, but also some are saying that they're traveling international. And if you look at the next slide, most of this, most of this traveling is going to be spread throughout a bunch of different occasions and also a bunch of different destinations. Family vacation and visiting friends and relatives seems to be the most common occasions for why consumers are choosing to travel. And in the summer, it makes sense that a lot of consumers are looking to go to beach places, theme parks, go to another city to check out, the food scene, the entertainment scene. And so there's no general consensus on like, oh, in the summer, everybody's going to go to the beach this year. It feels like consumers are spreading out their traveling occasions a lot. And with that in mind, we then ask consumers, well, with the economy in your mind, with all of the inflation, with all of the different challenges that, the entire economy is going through right now, do you expect your traveling costs this year to be higher or lower than last year? And unsurprisingly for me, I think 50% of the consumers, especially Gen X and boomers, expect their traveling costs to be higher this summer compared to prior years, and about 40% expect them to be just as much of the same. So very few are saying that they expect to spend less traveling this summer compared to prior years. And with this phenomenon, we wanted to know, if prices are higher and if you're expecting to spend a lot more money, how will you respond to these rising prices and these rising costs? And something that's surprising to me, I think, is about 20% of consumers actually say that even though costs are higher, about 20% say that they won't actually change how they travel or the decisions that they make while, booking a trip or planning their destination and their itinerary. So that's a very interesting stat for me, because I was expecting most consumers to resort to one or two different austerity measures to keep their costs low. But among those measures, around 1/3 of consumers say that they will take fewer trips than usual. Also around 1/3 would say that they would choose less expensive restaurants than usual on their trip. And also nearly a quarter will either shorten the duration of their trip or cut items or activities from their itinerary. So definitely a lot of trading down that's happening both across food and beverage, but also in terms of entertainment, in terms of activity, also in terms of lodging. So consumers are definitely being strategic about cutting down their traveling costs in order to still be able to afford the vacation that they plan with their families and friends, which for a lot of consumers are a very important facet of life that will not change even if the economy is currently going through some tough times. So moving on, with that in mind, we asked all consumers, when you're traveling and you're choosing different restaurants and places to eat, which of the following factors are the most important to you? And unsurprisingly, the top two are always going to be price and cuisine type. Price is the most important factor for around 2/3 of consumers. And so, hopefully the closed captioning issues resolve. And Teresa, I'm so sorry that you didn't see the screen from the previous slide. The deck for this presentation will be available after the webinar, so you can definitely check out all of that data later. But getting back to the slide, price and cuisine type are the most salient factors for consumers. Following that are sort of proximity to where they're staying and any special offers, deals, and discounts that tourists might be able to access while in a different city or a different state. So that's a really important point when you're planning, if your operator is planning to build different programming around tourists or like traveling consumers this month. So that's sort of the data we have in terms of summer travel. And now I'm going to move on to some data we have from our latest recreation keynote, which is a major study on 13 different recreation venues. And you can see them all listed on the next slide, Mike, going from anything from sports and concert stadiums to golf clubs, amusement parks, all the way to casinos, movie theaters, museum, fitness centers, every single place that you can imagine consumers engaging in some sort of entertainment, some sort of recreation, and also buy food and beverage. And this might feel like a really hyper-focused microcosm because all of these are very unique venues for which food service is a little different from your typical restaurant or food service operation. But if you notice, consumers are actively visiting a lot of these venues. if you can see on the next slide, over 2 in 3 consumers have visited a movie theater in the past month. 2 in 5 say that they visited an Asia Park. Nearly a third have visited a casino, a rec center, a sport and concert stadium, a museum. So all of these venues are places that consumers are actively visiting and also actively buying food from. We ask consumers, when you're going to these places and having fun, is food really important to you when you're engaging these activities? And for most of these 13 venues, food is a pretty important factor, especially for places like cruises, amusement parks, sports and concert stadiums, ski resorts, casinos. If you put these 2 slides side by side, I won't ask you to do that because it's a little cumbersome, Mike, but I'll just tell you.
Good.
In the previous slide, we asked folks, how often or did you visit these venues in the last 6 months? And what we're seeing here is that for the recreation venues that consumers have visited least or visited least frequently, like cruises, ski resorts, casinos, places with a higher ticket or cost of entry, or places that tend to be seasonal, you actually find that in those places, consumers value food the most. So food is the most important factor in terms of a cruise experience and amusement parks. Those are places that you stay for a long time and you really indulge in food and beverages. So it's clear that these are very important food service occasions and I would say opportunity for consumers. If you move on to the next slide, we asked consumers who do visit these venues how often they're purchasing food when they go. And unsurprisingly, nearly 2/3 of consumers always or frequently buy food at places like cruises, movie theaters. Think of your popcorn, your hot dog, your amusement park, burgers, sports and concert stadium, your pint of beer, watching baseball. So all of these places, consumers are buying food very, very frequently. And the numbers are also pretty high for places like casinos, golf clubs, bowling alleys, and all of these places. Food is clearly an important aspect of recreation, and that's the whole point of this keynote. And when we looked and compare and contrasted all of these venues together, we actually found in the next slide, Mike, that over half of all visitors, so over 50% of consumers who visited these venues, purchased food during their last most recent visit to 10 of the 13 venues examined. And that number is 11 out of 13 for non-alcoholic beverages. So very likely that if they're going to any of these recreation venues, they're buying a drink, they're buying some food. So food is clearly important. And what's more interesting here is that not all of this food and beverage purchasing or spending is premeditated or planned in advance. It's not like everybody goes to a movie theater going, I'm going to go see Spider-Man next week at a movie theater. And I know for a fact that I'm going to get a hot dog, I'm going to get a large Coke, I'm going to get a beer on the side. A lot of this purchasing is actually happening on the fly, whether that means, I go to a movie theater, I didn't plan on getting popcorn, but that giant machine is in front of me and I cannot resist. Or this is something that people plan very briefly in advance. I'm seeing a movie tonight with my friends. I'll text them and ask if they wanted to get, popcorn or drinks or share a hot dog, share some nachos. So as you can see, nearly 62% food and beverage purchasing at fitness center, 58% at museums, 56% at nature parks, all of these places that people don't typically buy food from. A lot of that spending is unexpected, and it's an interesting opportunity to sort of engage consumers who don't typically associate these recreation venues with food and beverage purchasing. Consumers are, when they go to places to be entertained, they're often also a little impulsive and they want to have fun and a little bit more uninhibited. So this is a really good opportunity for food service operators to engage these consumers at the premise itself, instead of and making things that are very appealing, very colorful, very attractive, and making sure that folks spend. And yeah, absolutely. So when I say purchasing, we asked 2 separate questions in this keynote. Purchasing means, have you bought an item that you did not expect to buy? And spending is, have you, and we have a separate question about the amount of money that consumers are spending more than they typically spend at a venue. So that's have you bought something unexpected on the left, and on the right is have you spent more money than you would typically expect to spend at that venue. So thank you for asking. I realize now that it's a little unclear with the headers, but hopefully that clears things up. Moving on, the last pieces of data that I'll share with you today in terms of these recreation venues is, because food service operations already exist at most of these recreation venues, we ask consumers who do visit those venues, are they satisfied with the food and beverage that they find there? And for the most part, consumers are pretty satisfied with the kinds of food that they're able to source. In fact, when we ask consumers, do they think that food quality at these places have improved over the years? Most consumers actually say that, either that the food quality that they notice at these places have stayed the same or have actually improved over the years, and very few say that the food has gotten worse. So that's a pretty reassuring sign. And that this slide actually also indicates that there is actually room for improvement opportunity for almost every single one of these venues. A really interesting stat that we discovered while working on this keynote is that we ask consumers first to rate their satisfaction with the food and beverage that they find, and then their satisfaction with the overall experience. So not just the food and beverage. And for most of these venues, except for maybe I would say one or two, consumers actually rate the overall experience more favorably than they rate the food and beverage. So what this is really pointing out to, Mike, if you sort of like move on to the next slide, is that for these recreation venues, food and fun are interchangeable. These are things that go hand in hand for all of these places, and that means that improving one means improving the other. There's opportunity for all of these places to step up their food and beverage offering, to engage consumers on premise, to menu craveable dishes that people can share on social media, things that are portable, things that make people excited to visit a state fair or an amusement park, or really excited to buy food and bring into a 3-hour movie at a movie theaters, because for some reason movies are just that long now. And also a lot of these places, for most of these venues, consumers are going with friends and family or coworkers. Very few consumers say that they visit any of these venues alone. So that means that there's an opportunity to menu shareable dishes, things that, a group of friends can get different items off a menu and trade with each other, or allow each other to try out. So all this is to say that recreation is becoming more and more more salient point of purchasing and a more salient food destination for consumers across all ages. And this is something that really needs investigating. And I'm very glad that our coworkers on the content team have produced this amazing keynote. It's over 200 slides studying all 13 of these venues in depth, from state fairs to amusement parks to museums. So, if you have a Report Pro subscription, if you're interested in checking some of this data out, I highly, highly recommend you do so. It's really, really amazing. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Claire, who's going to give us an amazing insight into seasonality.
And I just had one question real quickly before we go over.
Yeah.
For movie theaters, did you get this? I feel like that's, one area that we still keep hearing they're not back. We don't necessarily see people coming in droves like we did prior to the pandemic. Just like from, your research and the team's research that was done. I mean, what's your take on kind of movie theaters and what's going to happen in the future here? Is it kind of going to be, that lower attendance level, and maybe some of the, the money comes from things like food, or what do you think is going to happen here in the future?
Oh, that's a really tough question, because but yeah, no, I think what this data is showing, at least, is that the entertainment itself is one aspect, but there's always room to draw consumers in with food and beverage. You can see that consumers really value their food and beverage options when they go to a movie theater. So I can definitely see that in terms of our study as a major drawing factor for consumers. So I definitely think there's a lot of opportunity there. And like Rachel said in the chat, good food and beverage actually prevents them from going straight to streaming at home.
True,
but yeah, there's some, it's very interesting that you asked that question, because now there's some really, really engaging discourse that's happening in chat about whether or not the movies these days are entertaining or not. So clearly that is a question beyond us and beyond the food and beverage industry, but there's definitely mileage to be had here.
Great, yeah. I mean, yeah, I'll check out the chat after the fact. Also, I don't have the option to turn on closed captioning. I've checked everything that people sent, so we're going to try to do it after the fact. We do make this available, after this is over, and we will make sure that we can kind of get that functionality turned on in the future as well. But with that, we'll turn it over to Claire. So a lot of the foods and flavors that you would see at these recreational venues will use a lot of the seasonal flavors that Claire's about to talk about here.
Yeah, and I think that it's a good point. There's a lot of opportunity. It's hard for movie theaters particularly to pivot per movie, but like I don't see movies that often, but when I saw Downton Abbey, the place had like special cocktails for it. So there's definitely some relationship they could work with. So the intro to this section is sort of funny. It's a slide from Jack from February 2022, where he asked, is seasonal the new fresh? Which if you have not been in the land of Data Central for the better part of a decade, we used to say fresh was like a good cue that things were in fact fresh. And then every single menu had the word fresh on it, and it had entirely no menu. And it almost warned you that perhaps the food was in fact not fresh, because I felt like telling you it was fresh. It sounds like 85+% of menus call out something as fresh. So he was like, does it have no meaning? Is that where we're headed? And if you can go to the next slide, Mike. You can see when he asked us, it was that 2022 number where we saw that first there was the 2021 kind of nosedive, where a lot of things had a nosedive after 2020, and then it was leveling off, and now it seems to have leveled off sort of entirely. And I don't know that it will decline further. Our machine learning Haiku certainly does not think it will nosedive. It'll just kind of level off there. There's always reasons to call out seasonal on a menu. You have your seasonal fruit that has perfectly good, it lets you know this will change, but it's not going to be like anything sort of earth shattering. It's just going to be, melon in the summer and, I don't know, grapes in the fall or winter, whatever. But overall, you want your menu to show rather than tell seasonality. So don't call out your seasonal salad. Your consumers who are loyal, they know it's a seasonal salad. You don't have to tell them, just show them with what's happening. So here are some thoughts on how to make that happen. This is just a pretty picture. There's no restaurant featuring this that I'm aware of, but if there was, I would definitely go and eat this salad, though they seem to be mixing up spring radishes and summer fruit, but I'd still be into it. But what you'll see throughout this little section of mine, and you've seen it before if you've been on these webinars for quite some time, is we can do this seasonality analysis using our item launches database, or Insider, you might have heard us previously call it. What we can do there is we have all of the new items, limited time offers, and returning items from various segments. So we've got grocery deli in there, we've got convenience stores, all your main chain restaurants, and we can see if it's offered in this month versus not offered in other months. We can then index it and determine what is seasonal to that season. So I did that analysis here. 100 would mean, not seasonal, equal across seasons. So these things are far more seasonal to that by a long shot. And you can see, pineapple, a little bit seasonal, but when you add that outdoor feel of grilled pineapple, way more seasonal. And it can hint to people like this is definitely a summer seasonal option. Watermelon, of course, does that. And then as always, there's that specification. So white peach, more seasonal than just generic peach. And then there's some twists in it. Like citrus is usually winter, makes sense that citrus is season, but not yuzu. That gives fairly summer vibes for whatever reason. So those are some thoughts on how to hint at it with ingredients, but you can also hint at it with item descriptors. This part, I looked specifically at adult beverage because there's just a lot of good descriptions that index highly based on what type of liquor you look at. So muddled is the most summer seasonal term when you pair for rum because mojitos. But you don't have to muddle only fresh mint. You can muddle whatever you want, and it indicates that there was probably a fresh item of some nature, and that's what Bonefish Grill does in this. And I do want to thank the item launches team who sent me this a little bit early, so I did not have to work over the long weekend. I got a sneak peek last Friday, and I appreciate them very much. But this one has the fresh watermelon martini. So these are releases that were just released last month. And you can see hand muddled, probably seasonal. House made, everyone knows, like that probably meant some care and some current ingredients. Or you can, hint at it with your menu language or how you're advertising it. A backyard breeze and a cool breeze, that certainly feels like summer, even if pineapple is a little less seasonal and cranberry is certainly not the top flavor I think of in summer, but you still get kind of a summer feel from that backyard breeze.
Sure.
And then another fun one, I had never done this before, and I definitely went into a bit of a seasonality spiral to see this, is I wanted to see within each of these, we usually don't break them up, restaurants, convenience store, grocery deli, and meal kits, what was most seasonal across them. So what skewed to summer within those segments, and then what was found across all of them. So there were other things where it was either, one season it was in, fall for C-store, and then something else for grocery deli, but across all of the segments, and it was featured across all of them. So anything where, one of the segments didn't offer it at all, I didn't include. What screams summer across all of these segments? And you can see it's blueberries and pulled pork of all things, and especially the pulled pork for C-stores, which we'll get more into that, to kind of why that is in a bit. So those are, and then this one, I'm both very excited and deeply apprehensive to share this with all of you, which is because everyone has been wanting a summer menu adoption cycle for many years. And I have always, as kind of the leader of our menu adoption cycle, council said, we don't need that. The cycles have seasonality in them. But last year, because seasonal has mostly lost its meaning and is pretty ubiquitous, we put it into ubiquity, which means that answer is no longer true. And I had to face reality, and no better time than this webinar. So we did a summer menu adoption cycle. He was my key co-author on this, and we used art and science as we always do. So the art is a bazillion of these charts that you already saw some of, but the entire seasonality report from Report Pro was the art or the science behind it. And then there's so much art is what we were realizing as we were doing it, because summer has so much of that comfort food thing. And maybe people in the chat want to share, there's so much, what's summer to me might be different to summer to you, depending on where I grew up in the US and what state fairs I attended, what feels summery. The one that is definitely mine is regionality plus seasonality, a very important thing. Like paletas, I grew up in a pretty Mexican neighborhood of Chicago, and so when Hui was like, you should put that on there, I was like, oh my gosh, how did I miss my nostalgia food? And then there's so much of a home cook feel here, where you need all of your deli salads. And then there's Kevin C, and then you open yourself to criticism. So okra and Inception, how could you do that? But a lot of people eat okra, and if you are not in the South and you like okra like yours truly, and you don't want it frozen, you have to grow it yourself. So there's a lot of kind of tricks to it. Lots of surprises already. We'll get to gazpacho more in a little bit. So next slide. And then this is a real twist from the menu adoption cycle. I also just wanted to get some nice data points in here. It's nice to have data when you're doing a webinar of what your chain introductions look like by restaurants and convenience stores over the past 3 years by the seasons, to see if there's any patterns. Is summer most important to one thing? What quickly jumps out is introductions are most important to quick service by far, no matter the season. That's the core takeaway. And then the other one that doesn't jump out, more of a whisper, because convenience stores is, as you can see, under leveraging LTOs in general, but they are, to me, and I don't have that sales data, but it feels like they're super under leveraging summer, just because personally, I certainly go to more C-stores. Hui's section talked about it, you're going on long trips to visit your family. You know what you are probably stopping at in between when you need to get gas, and you are going to go make a second purchase at a fast food restaurant with more interesting introductions if they aren't prioritizing their food. So there's that. So those are some chain introduction takeaways. And then what I did was look at each segment to see what was most seasonal and most unique to them. So these are not necessarily just the top seasonal, but top seasonal versed. And then someone was, why does the QSR chart bar change colors? Because that is the default of how we do pretty charts. And I just didn't. That's why. That's the same as the pink orange that Jeff always does on his. I just loved it for QSR since it was the main call out. So summer at restaurants, these are some of the key call outs, and then some call outs to other things we've talked about. What's old is new again. So apple butter kind of threw me off. I think of that as a fall flavor, but that is not what the data said. And I double checked because it looked weird to me, but that is accurate. But I wanted to draw our attention to white barbecue. And then it's on the next slide, we've got, it's growing on menus, and it's still a little small, but it's one that really, it looks like ranch. It has the word barbecue sauce. It pairs with chicken. What's not to like? And so that's on the next slide. In fact, that is true. In our concept testing database, where we take these new items, test them with consumers, what's not to like indeed, no matter what you put it on, whether it's a cheddar burger, you just pair it with your barbecue, you serve it in, it's a little older example, but I liked the thigh wing call out, a little retro almost at this point. And then the pizza, you can see they have pretty good uniqueness, pretty high purchase intent, and all of them are pretty solid performers in your 70 to 80 range. This was another one for C-stores because they are under leveraging summer, or at least it looks like to me as someone who does not know, again, their traffic data. There's not a lot that was super seasonal to them. They have a couple more things, but they weren't unique to them. The two that jump out, and it's not all one chain driving Italian sub. I did check for that it wasn't like causing all of this, but Italian subs are unique. I'm sure they offer them year round, but as far as advertising them and focusing around them, the Italian sub that you can grab and continue on your way indexes highly in the summer, as does cobbler, but cobbler as flavor, not necessarily. I'm offering you scoops of cobbler, which would probably be very suspicious, but it's like blueberry coffee type cobbler, which sounds delightful to me. We just don't have those near me, so those are cobblers. Same chart. Little less going on, and I missed one of the charts. You can tell I was like too excited about the data, didn't clean up my charts. So there's also pink and red on this one, but just to look at grocery deli introductions, you can see they don't necessarily spike. So 2020 they were like getting back into it, and it spiked a little bit in winter as people were having their gatherings once again and leaning on grocery deli. And then it looks like in 2021 they knew that it would be a good year for summer. People were back to gathering outside, might need some help. And then 2022, it kind of settled out, and spring and summer were the big seasons for, so there's no consistency really. There still seems like they're trying to figure out as a whole the strategy for that. And this way I went a little backwards. Instead of showing you what indexes highly at grocery deli first, I did it's growing on menus. Does anyone know what this is? I bet you do. Anyone in the comments? So we can go to the next slide. I'd always, this one surprised me. Once we added in grocery deli to seasonality, the Hatch chili it was clearly driven entirely by grocery deli. There's still some action, and we'll see those in a bit from restaurants, but like what they do with Hatch chilies at grocery deli is just outrageous. And then there's some other items that index highly.
Jacqueline on I just lost my earphone. I'll let you go ahead, Claire.
Well, you need to change the next slide, Mike. I need you.
I found it. Well, I was just going to say, Jacqueline on the Transpotting team, she's working on our Dine Around issue that covers the Western U.S. And she found a Hatch chili coffee, and it's not even infused. I think it is infused with Hatch chilies, but it has whole pieces of Hatch chilies floating in it.
Oh.
And then
that sounds amazing. I love infused, like I love bad flavored coffee.
Really?
I love, like, real flavored coffee even more.
I don't know. Yeah.
I don't know if I love texture in my coffee so much as infusions.
But it wouldn't texture. It'd be fine, right? It's just the grounds that do it, or is it floating in like a?
No, yeah, literally.
We'll see. We'll check out the issue for more, I guess.
Yeah, check out the issue.
But these are some introductions of Hatch chilies and what's happening at grocery deli. So we've got these, and I did try to pick more unique ones. So I'm sure that the Hatch pepper chocolate chip cookies aren't the like top seller, but they're certainly interesting, and they'd probably be good with that coffee. Hatch chili cornbread, putting peppers in cornbread is such a classic from Albertsons. And then there are few foods as classic as a rotisserie chicken from grocery deli. So you might as well make it fun and mix up the flavors with the Hatch chili.
That sounds delicious.
Doesn't it? And then you can notice these examples are old, relatively speaking. Like there was nothing I could work with much from 2022, and I had to use 2 Buffalo Wild Wings examples if I wanted high performing items. So they're certainly under leveraged by restaurants for whatever reason. I'm sure there's some challenges in getting them consistently and the products that are available, but it looks like there could be some opportunities given how much grocery deli is doing and how little restaurants are doing.
It's interesting to see a bison item score so highly.
Yeah.
And then this was the other we were talking about, it depends on what you grew up with. So I wanted to do a slide on nostalgia. And these were some things that I came up with. I think, Mike, you already mentioned with that state fair thing, kind of anything with s'more feels. I like that they called this one campfire. I personally like when things are not too sweet. So it's just the sweet foam and mostly coffee like this. They had a whole line of them, but this was the one I would order. And then funnel fries, there were 2 or 3 funnel cake items, but the funnel fries are sort of funny. I feel like they try to trend every couple of years, but nobody's sure, like they don't do great year round on the menu. They seem like a perfect LTO, like they try and then they don't. And I think that's an LTO moment. And then an orange dipped cone, there's nostalgia and dipped cones is just a classic. So beyond the cherry Dairy Queen one that my family always is searching for. This one sounds delightful, a take on a creamsicle. I feel like all generations would find this like either it's new and different or it feels very retro.
Love that.
And then I wanted to look at our meal kit data because I love any excuse to look at our meal kit data. We don't use it as much. And as we mentioned, like it's just, there are moments where you're doing a lot of travel, but then when you get home, the first thing you want to do is like really cook something yourself usually. Like I'm so sick of eating all of this delicious indulgent food. Now is the time for being a home cook. And these are some things that popped out uniquely within them for summer. Nectarines seemed like a particularly interesting one. You'll see some plums usually on restaurant menus, a little bit apricots flavored things, but you don't see nectarine all that much. I know it was like a seasonal option in my beloved Hoplark hop tea. They did the nectarine one. And I was like, more people should do nectarine. So that's my nectarine agenda. Sope also indexes highly. And then grilled corn, of course, which I think that's more of how it's called out. We restaurants, we like to call it elote or street corn. Home cook, they go with grilled corn. And then here, gazpacho makes another triumphant return. It's not menu very much. People don't love it. We could pull it up in the consumer preferences info, but that's one that I think is a really good home cook opportunity. You don't necessarily, you need to have a really good blender for it. Not everyone does. And most soup is not ready to just be poured out and pretend it's gazpacho. So maybe we're missing an opportunity there. And then the next slide.
In some parts of the country, like Texas and New Orleans right now, we better start liking some of these chilled soups, I feel like.
They're so, I love chilled soups, but like it has to be the right moment. You're like, no, thank you. I feel like when I love salad year round, and so sometimes in the summer I want something else, but it would just be me a bunch of chilled soups and nobody else. So I would make them. But here is a nice, beautiful meal kit example of that. And I think that's it.
I have one question. So when we talked earlier at the beginning about how we're seeing, a lot of the pumpkin spice and fall stuff released early in August now. I mean, do you see that like when you're looking at the seasonality? Do you see pumpkin spice show up in summer?
I was this
and you
close
have to
pulling the May data just to see what was happening to show it. And I think that is true. Like strawberries are like the classic. Like it's kind of straddles between the 2 seasons, but it's so much so, Mike, that I believe if you look at the seasonality report, pumpkin doesn't even index highly enough on some fall charts. Because so much is showing up in summer, and it almost is starting to index highly in the summer because I can't change the data, right? But I think we'll have to have a special slide that reports on that in the future.
That's interesting, super interesting. Well, just to finish up here, we're going to zero in on kind of a particular family of flavors that we see year round, but we particularly see on summer and kind of hot weather menus, which are spicy flavors. And, I think we've been saying for years now that kind of consumers' capacity for spice and heat just continues to increase year after year. And so, if you're looking for permission to play with some of the super spicy flavors that are out there and some of those peppers, now is definitely the time to do it. So just some quick stats here. So 71% of menus overall feature the word spicy in some capacity. 11% of drink menus actually feature the word spicy. So you can see how it's hitting other categories. So I think it's a fairly similar percentage of dessert menus feature the word spicy. Actually, 1 out of every 5 casual dining menus, drink menus has the word spicy on it. So we see a lot of those spicy margaritas and cocktails and like that. So really spreading across the menu. 85% of menus feature some type of pepper at this point. So the vast majority of menus do have some type of spicy option. 270 spicy LTOs were released in the past year. So that's actual LTOs that use the word spicy, and that's at major chains across the country. And the average purchase intent score for those was 48%. So a pretty high score, actually. That's kind of, average across all of them for spicy flavors. So if you have this idea that, they're super polarizing, that's actually not necessarily the case. It's a good number of consumers who agree that, the options that we're adding to major chain menus are things that they want to purchase. It was the same percentage who said that they would go to a particular chain for that item too. So 48% of consumers said that they would be drawn to a particular chain just to try those spicy items that were being released. This comes from the condiment, sauces, and dressings keynote report. So we asked consumers, of all of these sauces and condiments here, which area are you increasing your consumption the most on? Which areas has it stayed the same and where is it decreasing? You can see here nearly a quarter of consumers say hot sauce is where they're increasing their consumption. So by far, of any of these, that's the area where we're seeing a lot of increase in hot sauce consumption. We definitely see more consumers now who have particular preferences around their brand, what brands that they love of hot sauces. We see a number of, manufacturers across the industry who are getting into hot sauce, and it's because of, statistics like this. We did ask, this is from that same report, what level of heat or spice do you prefer? So kind of breaking it down here. And so you can see it's actually, fairly well. I think a lot of people think that most Americans are kind of wimps. And I guess this is a little bit of like, kind of a self, reporting on what they actually consider to be super hot and spicy. But it's pretty like evenly distributed here. So you can see there is that 12% who say it can't be spicy or too hot enough for them. Like they absolutely love as much spice as possible. The majority there said they like it pretty moderately spicy or hot. 21% said balanced by some sweetness, which is where we see a lot of the growth when it comes to ingredients. So a lot of those hot honeys and mango habaneros and things like that. 22% say they like it mild. And then there is that, percentage of consumers who say they don't like spice at all. Those are the ones that absolutely stay away from it. The demographic differences here are very interesting. So you can see that male identifying consumers tend to really like spice a lot more. And then it does skew a lot younger. So the younger you are, the more likely you are to say that you like things, pretty darn spicy. And then this is really recent data. It's actually not even released yet. So our next webinar is going to be about the mid-year trends report. And there's one section in the mid-year trends report that looks at craveability and what consumers perceive to be really craveable. And so we had this one question where we gave them all of these options. And we said, of all of these, which do you believe to be the most craveable? What sounds super craveable? What sounds super delicious to you? You can only choose one. So these are the totals here across all generations, across all consumers. You can see spicy flavors fall at number 4 there. So overall, 20% of consumers said homemade is very craveable. Just under that, it's all you can eat. Grilled, and then we saw spicy. But you can see the differences here in the demographic changes. For Gen Z, it ties for first place. So 15% of Gen Z said homemade sounds really craveable. 15% said all you can eat. And then that same 15% said spicy. So you do have that percentage of consumers who say that that's a super craveable, delicious word. We should be using it more in the industry. And it scores a lot higher than some areas that I think people would associate more with craveability. Maybe some of those, sweet terms, maybe things like crunchy that we often kind of use as go-tos on menus. We really, based on this, should be using spicy and hot a lot more. And it is, in a similar way, in that it's different from, maybe sweet flavors or some of those other terms there. Spice is almost like a lifestyle. Like there's almost kind of like these trappings of, I'm somebody that loves heat, we don't really have kind of crunchy YouTube channels, but we have YouTube channels dedicated to eating spicy foods. I'm sure a lot of people know hot ones, where celebrities eat spicier and spicier hot sauces over the course of it. A lot of people that love spice, it's a true love for spice. It really is kind of part of, who they are and how they eat. And so, we see that trickle down into products. So Pringles has done such a good job with so many of their flavor releases recently. But so they did the Hot Ones, pegged release that was specifically related to the Hot Ones YouTube show. We see enormously spicy flavors in a way that we wouldn't have previously, maybe 10 to 15 years ago. So the Paqui One Chip Challenge, I don't know if anybody in chat has tried this chip and exactly how spicy, you know, there's so many YouTube and TikTok videos of people trying it, but these really extreme challenges, you know, these really, really insanely spicy options that maybe we wouldn't have seen, you know, on menus or in retail products years ago. There's also kind of this association with really over the top foods and kind of challenges and flavors. This is a bagel manufacturer or a chain out of New Jersey that's found on Goldbelly, and they actually do this Flamin' Hot Cheetos bagel that it's infused with Flamin' Hot Cheetos in the bagel. And then they put ghost pepper in the cream cheese, and then you can actually put Flamin' Hot Cheetos on top of the bagel. You can order a dozen of them through Goldbelly. So you see these, you know, really crazy over the top flavors, you know, in this category a lot. And it's, like I said, almost a lifestyle. You know, now we see it kind of trickling down into the culture, into the media. As I don't know if anybody's watched the movie. It's on Hulu now about, you know, the purported origin story of Flamin' Hot Cheetos and where they came from. I haven't watched it yet, but you can see, you know, just how central it is to our culture now. We're even, you know, issuing warnings. You know, there's been a couple stories that people have eaten too many Flamin' Hot Cheetos. You know, they had to have their gallbladders replaced. I don't know if these are more like urban legends or, you know, these things actually happened. There's a guy on YouTube, if you look it up, it's the 10,000 calorie Flamin' Hot Cheeto challenge, and he tries to eat 10,000 calories worth of Flamin' Hot Cheetos. And then the other area, which, you know, also does overlap a lot with what you talked about, Claire, is kind of the sweet heat flavors and, you know, some of those peppers. I think, you know, if you go to the Sweets and Snacks Expo, this is where so much of the innovation is happening. You know, so many of the sweet and spicy, you know, flavors. So many brands that I don't think, you know, 10 to 20 years ago would have, you know, incorporated any, you know, spice into their product lines. I mean, now it's pretty common to see. So if you are looking to, you know, work with spice or add some spice to the menu or into your retail products, where should you look? So these are some of the particular pepper options that are growing on the menus. So you can see there's a lot of compound flavors here, things like pickled Fresnos, really spicy flavors, and then more interesting ones. The things that are declining tend to be the really mild, kind of well-known ones, like green peppers. And then just the kind of across menus, across categories, these are some of the options that are growing. Things like salsa macho, which we've talked about a lot, Tajin, one of the fastest growing menus. So a lot of these kind of compound flavors. These are great options to introduce because it's often a good entryway for consumers. And with that, we made it right on time. We have 1 minute to spare. So our next webinar is going to be August 3rd, Thursday at noon, as per usual. It's going to be the mid-year trends. So we have our giant mid-year trends report releasing in the next few weeks. So it's gonna cover a lot of the foods and flavors that we cover in that one. And I know Claire and I believe Jack is going to be back. So if you missed Jack, join us for the August 3rd webinar. And as always, you know, send us an email, hello@datacentral.com. You know, we're happy to answer any questions, get you access to any of the reports or services that we talked about on the webinar. But thanks everybody for joining us. I think this was a really fun one that really covered a lot of foods and flavors, you know, in kind of a fun summer season. So